Okay, so today we're diving deep into something we all think we understand pretty well. Freedom of speech. It's a term you hear constantly, right? Especially online. And it often makes us think of like total freedom to say absolutely anything. But what if I told you that common idea isn't really the full picture? That there are actual boundaries, specific ones, and lots of subtle misunderstandings that, well, they can lead to real problems if you're not careful. So, our mission for this deep dive is to sort of peel back those layers. We want to explore the true limits, the common mix ups around free speech, especially, in our digital lives. We've pulled together some really fascinating sources for you. They offer some great insights into what you can say, what you probably can't, and maybe the most important part, why those differences exist.
That why is just so critical, isn't it? Because we're just flooded with information now
Yeah.
from everywhere. And anyone really can put their thoughts out there for the whole world to see.
Yeah.
So understanding these boundaries, it's not just academic. It's fundamental if you're engaging online, if you're trying to make sense of all the noise, or even if you just want to share your own ideas responsibly.
Yeah.
Because, like we always say, knowing something is one thing, but really understanding it, applying it, that's where the value is.
Precisely. Okay, so let's start with a really basic distinction that gets blurred all the time. It's that difference between, say, expressing a personal opinion, your own thought, versus stating something unproven like it's a hard fact. This is where so much confusion and honestly a lot of the trouble really starts.
Right.
So, like, think of it this way. Imagine someone just states flat out, the national debt has zero impact on future economic growth. Just like that, presented as undeniable truth. Now, compare that to someone saying maybe, well, my personal view, just based on what I've read and maybe my own intuition, is that the debt's impact on growth is probably overstated sometimes.
See the difference?
Huge difference. The first one is just an unverified claim thrown out as fact. The second clearly flags it as, a personal take, an opinion.
Hmm.
And that switch from this is fact to this is my thought is massive. But people cross that line constantly, maybe without even noticing.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, or maybe a bit worrying, is how often these two things get mashed together in conversation, particularly online. People genuinely think they're just using their free speech, but what they're actually doing is making these unsubstantiated factual claims.
Yeah.
No real basis.
Right.
And it's not just about word choice like semantics. It has real consequences. This basic mix-up really underlines why we need to be, well, clearer and more precise when we communicate, especially if we're trying to share info or, influence how people see things.
Definitely, you have to be careful with your words. Otherwise, yeah, your whole point can get twisted. Okay, so this idea becomes super important when we look at something most of us deal with every single day, social media. Given this key difference, opinion versus fact, how does that actually work in the, let's be honest, messy, fast world of online platforms? What are these sites really looking for when they moderate stuff? And why do people get, banned or suspended? Well, our sources are pretty clear that a major reason for platforms taking action comes down to false claims.
Hmm.
And a false claim in this context basically means making a statement without any verifiable evidence or facts backing it up. And crucially, it also includes presenting your own personal thought or belief as if it is objective fact without saying, I think, or in my opinion.
Right.
These platforms have teams, actual people whose job it is to find and remove content and sometimes ban users who break those user agreements, the things we all click agree on.
That
Digital contract.
And it's not just false claims either that leads to content removal or bans. If we connect this to the bigger legal picture, two other really significant areas are copyright infringement and plagiarism.
Ah,
So copyright infringement, that's using someone else's original work. Could be a video clip, a photo, music, even text, without getting their permission first. It's about respecting, intellectual property.
makes sense.
And plagiarism, that's a bit different. That's taking someone else's ideas or words and passing them off as your own, not giving credit where it's due, essentially claiming you created something you didn't.
Gotcha.
And here's the thing. When these kinds of disputes end up in court, the social media companies, they usually win.
Really? Why is that?
Well, the reason's pretty straightforward, legally speaking. Doing things like using copyrighted stuff without permission, or making completely baseless claims that could damage someone's reputation, that could be defamation,
Yeah.
right, or plagiarizing. These are, at their core, unlawful activities.
Okay.
It's important to remember, too, for a claim to be defamation, it generally needs to be a false statement of fact that hurts a reputation, not just like a mean opinion. But the point is, these aren't just random rules the platforms made up. They often reflect existing legal frameworks that these companies have to follow.
That's a really crucial point. It's not always just the company's choice. Sometimes it's about the law telling them what they must do. So for you listening right now, maybe thinking, okay, how do I stay out of trouble with all this? How can I use social media safely and, responsibly? Our sources actually give some really practical advice, almost like a roadmap for online conduct. First up, they say, avoid plagiarism. Always. Always give credit if you're using specific info, data, or if you're naming people in your posts. Cite your sources. Second, respect copyright. This one's huge. Don't use copyrighted stuff, pictures, videos, music, whatever, unless you've actually gotten permission from the owner to share it. That's not just a suggestion, it's a legal must.
And then there's the one that honestly seems to trip people up the most online. It comes up again and again. It's the absolute need to distinguish your opinion from a statement of fact.
Back to that distinction.
Exactly. When you're sharing your personal thoughts on any platform, it is so important to clearly label it. Say, it's my thought, or what I think is, or I believe that.
Just make it clear it's subjective.
Precisely. This simple step, which so many people just forget or ignore, can make a world of difference. It helps avoid misunderstandings, avoids accusations of spreading misinformation, and ultimately can save you a lot of hassle. People just treat their views like established truths too often.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the last sort of general guideline is pretty straightforward. Follow the platform's policies. Every site you use, Facebook, X, TikTok, whatever, has its own rules about what's allowed and what's not. When you signed up, you agreed to those terms. So it's kind of on you to know what they are and stick to them.
Okay, this brings up a really practical question, especially now when so much discussion involves specific people or companies. If you are talking about someone or some entity, how specific can you actually be without, crossing a line? Well, the sources suggest being pretty cautious here. When you're talking about individuals, the general advice is try to avoid naming them directly, particularly if what you're saying could be seen negatively.
People don't usually like that.
No, understandably. And if you feel you absolutely must name someone, then qualify your statements. Make it crystal clear it's your opinion, maybe state you're not entirely sure it's true, but it's what you believe based on XYZ. For companies or bigger organizations, it's often possible to discuss them generally without naming names.
Right.
There's definitely a trade-off. Naming names might get you more clicks or engagement, sure, but it also carries a potential cost, legal trouble, damaging someone's reputation, platform sanctions. It's a risk.
And stepping back even further, beyond just what the platforms themselves decide, it's really important to understand that free speech can be limited by wider government regulations. This is a layer people often miss. In the U.S., for example, there are certain topics or certain ways of talking about things that the government does restrict.
Okay.
And social media companies, they are legally required to follow these rules. So sometimes when a user feels like a platform is being biased against them, the platform might actually just be doing what the government requires them to do, even if the user has no idea about that legal obligation behind the scenes.
Right. So this is where it gets really, really interesting. That idea that free speech is somehow a blank check to say anything, it's just not true. Never has been. There are clear, established legal limits.
Exactly right. Our sources point out several key examples, like gag orders.
Okay, what are those exactly?
They're issued by a court, and they basically stop people involved in a case from talking publicly about certain things. The whole point is to prevent that talk from messing up a fair trial.
Got it. Makes sense.
Then there's the whole area of confidential information. Think about regulatory bodies like the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission.
Right, dealing with stocks and finance.
Exactly. They have the power to restrict companies or individuals from publicly disclosing certain information if releasing it could, say, cause panic in the market, hurt investments unfairly, or generally harm the public interest. And one more important one, the idea of a government inquiry. If you put information out there online, the government is allowed to investigate.
Investigate what?
They can look into where the information came from, why you shared it, even how you got hold of it. Now, it's really important to distinguish here. The government asking questions isn't automatically wrong.
Okay.
Especially if the questions are genuinely about public safety or national security. It only becomes a real First Amendment problem if it's clearly being used just to shut someone up unfairly, without a legitimate reason. But proving that, that's usually a very high bar.
So, okay, with all these layers, platform rules, legal stuff, government regulations, what does it all actually mean for someone, maybe someone listening, who feels like, hey, this platform acted unfairly against me, they took down my post, they banned me. Is there any recourse?
Well, it paints a picture of a very specific and, frankly, usually quite narrow path if you want to successfully challenge a platform's decision. The sources really emphasize this. For you, the individual, to have a strong case, you need to have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, followed all the relevant guidelines meticulously.
Okay.
There's this almost theoretical exception they point out. Imagine this scenario. You have truly followed every single platform rule. You've accurately cited, say, an official government source for the information you shared. You explicitly didn't claim you discovered this info yourself. You just stated a verifiable fact citing the government.
Right.
And even then, the company still bans you just for stating that fact. Then, in that very specific kind of rare situation,
Then what?
then you could argue the bias is clear, that the company's own views, maybe their ideology, demonstrably trumped established verifiable facts sourced from the government itself. In that extraordinary case, it might lead to a court siding with the individual. But, and this is a big but, we have to stress, this is the exception, absolutely not the rule.
So most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah, the vast majority of bans or content removals, they happen because someone did break one or more of the rules or legal principles we've been talking about today: false claims, copyright, plagiarism, platform policy.
Ow. Oh, okay. So the big takeaway from this whole deep dive seems incredibly clear then. It's really essential to understand all these boundaries, these nuances, these legal limits before jumping to accuse a social media company of being unfair or biased. Free speech is, without a doubt, a powerful and fundamental right. It's a cornerstone of an open society.
Absolutely.
But like any right, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It comes with responsibilities, and as we've really dug into today, it comes with very real, legally defined limitations. It's like needing to know the rules of the road before you drive in the digital public square. And maybe this leaves us with a final thought, something important for all of us to consider. In this age where information travels instantly, where the line between fact and opinion seems blurrier than ever, how does our personal responsibility, our effort to tell fact from opinion, our commitment to following these guidelines, how does that actually shape the health of our public conversation? How does it protect the integrity of free expression itself for everyone?
That's a fantastic question to leave everyone with, something to really think about. We definitely encourage you as you go about your day online to reflect on how you apply these ideas, how you interact, and just as importantly, how you consume information. It really is a shared responsibility, building a more informed and hopefully more respectful digital world.